So my name is Eliza Camber, and I work for a tech-driven design agency. It's called Explicity, and we're based in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, and in New York. And I know that it's really like a hard time. It's been a long day for you as well, and for me, and for everyone. So I want you all to stand up. And I think that it's time that we wake up, but the audio doesn't work. Oh, it does. Come on. Yeah, you have to dance. That's the whole point of it. All right? Feeling a bit more awake? Yeah? All right, that sounds better already. So, Windows. So that was about 30 seconds. And according to a lot of studies, this is also about the time that you have to impress your users and make them to come back to you. Because the first impression is the one that will define if they are coming back or if they are uninstalling it. And this, of course, includes loading indicators, it includes splash screens, it includes pretty much everything. So you really, really want to focus on the 31st seconds. And what do? So we add motion. And motion can be integrated throughout your app, and if it's used wisely, the user wouldn't even understand why their experience with your app is just so fun and it's so meaningful, and it's natural and mostly enjoyable to them. On the other side, you can also surprise them with having some nice animations there while you have like a blocking action, like loading or sending a payment or sending, getting back your data from your APIs. And one too many? Too many? Jesus. So, if you're like me, not now, but in general, I started with animations and I found myself having too many APIs that I didn't know how to use. So you go through the documentation, and for at least 2 or 3 APIs, you will see pretty much the exact use cases when and when not to use them. So for me, it was more like a try and error, and that happened a few years ago, so it was even worse, because some APIs that are now considered deprecated back then, they were just still going on. So for the first one, we have my keyboard is going mad. So for the first one, we have the basic view animations, and we had 5 known subclasses. The first one is the alpha, and that will fade in and out an object, and a view, sorry. And then you had the rotate animation for, well, rotations. The scale animation for just making it bigger or smaller, the translate animation for moving it around, and the animation set that could play animations only on the same view. So far so good. If I want to animate something really simple, then for me that was my to-go. But you need to remember, like, if you have a clickable activity, like a clickable view, you don't really want to use that. And the reason is that the view moves, but the listener doesn't. So I'm not quite sure if it's visible here, but you click on top and it goes down, but then you click on that button and nothing happens. And then you click on top again and everything works. So when to use and when not to use. When to use when you have like very simple animations, but they are not like unclickable views. And also when you want to animate one or more properties of that view. But you can consider that as a deprecated package. There is really not a good reason for you to use it. And we will see other animators and animations that you can use, and it will be much, much simpler than that. So then we had the animation API, the property animation API, and it had 4 subclasses. The first was the value animator, and provides a simple timing engine that is running for getting the values. And we will see examples on how you use that later on. Then you had the object animator that can take those values and it will set it to an object, to your target object. Then you had the time animator, which provides a simple callback mechanism to listeners that is synchronized for animators in the system. And then you had the animator set, which just plays a lot of animators in the same view or in multiple views, and it can play them in sequence, it can play them in parallel, it can play them after a specific delay, it can play them wherever you want. And this is an example of an object animator, and know that all subclasses of that can also be from code and from the XML. So here is an example from the XML, and you can see how we can specify all of the properties that we want over there, and then we just load it like this. But of course, you can also do it programmatically, and I think that this is more common. So you can do it like this, and you just apply all the properties that you want, and then you hit the start, and then it starts. For the value animators, we create them like this. So as you can see, for all of them, it's a very simple way to create them. And this one, for instance, will animate the values from 0 to 100 in 1 second. And of course, this is pretty useless because, as we said with the value animator, it only animates the values, it only gets the values, updates them. But if you don't set them to an object, then those values mean nothing. So what you need to do if you want to customize the values, that you are going to use both the value animator and the object animator. So with the value animator, you calculate the values that you want, and it can be an int, it can be a float, it can be a color, it can be wherever you want. And with the object animator, you are going to set it to a target object. And we also have the view property animator, and it provides a simple way to animate multiple properties of the same view. So for the object animator and the value animator and the animator set, we said that we can also have it for multiple views. So for this one, the view property animator, it's only going to be one view. But the benefits for using this one is that if you want to use multiple properties of that same object, then it's really easy. Like the syntax is really easy to use. Oh, by the way, these lines will just do exactly the same as we saw with the object animator here and here. So it's exactly the same thing. So when to use, whenever we want to create simple animations. So instead of using the basic view animations that we saw earlier, that you can consider deprecated and please do not use it, you can use the object animator as your go-to animator for simple animations. And then when not to use, when you want to animate a layer list drawable. And if you have more questions about it, I'll be here. I also wrote an article about it. I had some pretty rough time animating the layer list drawables, and if you have questions about it, just find me and I'll answer them. So then we have the window content transitions. And the window content transitions is, as the name describes, when you move from one screen to another. And there are 3 ways to do that, to customize it. One is the enter animation, and the other one is the exit animation. And last but not least, we have the share element transitions. So for the enter and exit animations, there are 3 main transitions that are supported from that you can customize. One is the explode, that it's moving the views in and out from the center of the screen. And the other one is the slide, that it's moving it from either of the edges of the screen. and then the fade, which is going to set the alpha to 0 or to 1 to fade in or out your objects. But the most common one is the Ser element transitions, and we mostly have them when we have lists. So if you have lists and they have some same things in common, some same views in common, then for emphasizing continuity before the different screens, you can use this. So when the user navigates through your app, for him or her, it's more visible how the transitions is happening and what is changing from the screen or not. So Ser transformations involve synchronizing element movements, and it enhances continuity, as we said, before the placement of the same view in the starting screen, which is most of the times the list or the grid or whatever, and to the end one, which most of the times it's the detail list that we have, the detail screen. Before we go here, why we use them, it's when we are animating views, instead of just entering and exiting a screen, it makes the user to focus more on the content instead of just things moving around. So if I just move my image, then the user will not focus on that image because it's just a continuous movement and it's something that it's expected, but it will focus on the content that it's popping up. So here is how you can actually set the transitions. And as I said, most of the things that we have is, most of the cases that we have is for the list. So on the view holder at the bind, I set to my view, the view that I want to be shared with the other screen, the transition name. And the transition name doesn't specifically have to be something, it can be whatever you want. It has to be something unique, though, to identify the item on the way back. Then on my main activity, I will create an options compat. It's an activity options compat, and I will say that I want to make the scene transition animation. And then I just specify the shared view that I want, and the shared view is the IV avatar that I have over there. And then I will also specify the unique transition name that I want. And these two don't have to be the same, but you can use the same. It doesn't have to be. I would suggest it to be the same. And also, please don't have it as a string there and use the get string, please. And then we just start the activity as we would do with any, yes. We start the activity as we would do with any intent that we were going to send, and we send the bundle over there. We just make the options compat as a bundle. And you're all set. That's all that you have to do for sharing elements. So far so good. We can easily animate the properties of and the transition of one or multiple views. We can also animate the transitions between the two screens if we have two windows. And most of the times it's just not that simple. It's not just going from A to B. It's going to be A through X to Z to H and then to B. And this is pretty much most of the times my boss. So he will come to me and he will say like, so let's make this that he saw in a movie. And I'm like, sure, let's do it in Android. That's going to be fun. So for more complex animations, we have a few more APIs that we can use, and we can't make everything that the movies can, but we can do some pretty decent things. So for a start, I'll go for the animated vector durables. And have any of you used them here? Just a few hands. So one of the most common usages of the animated vector durables is the common shape change. And here is the example, for instance, that the check mark will go into a pencil and back to the check mark. So in order the icon to morph into another shape, we need to have the same actions and points to our two icons. And this is the most difficult thing. So you can see like these blue bubbles over there. It's the points that we have for the check mark icon. And then we also have it on the pencil. And the number of those has to match the number of those. And if it's anywhere close, if they're also like very simple icons, it's easy to do, but most of the times it's not, because it's going to be like a play button that it's going to be in a pause button, and then you just don't have action, like don't have control over that. Fortunately, there is a tool, and it's called Shapeshifter, that you can use for that. And what it does, it's pure magic, I don't know. But you press one you press one button and it actually magically does everything for you, and you just download it from there and you add it to your code, and then you do it from the other way around, so from the check mark to the done button, and from the done to the check mark. So you download both, you add them to the code, and you specify them to your view, and that's it. So you can find it on the shapeshifter.design, and it was made by Alex Lockwood and Roman Guy. Has any of you used it? The same people that use the icons. So vectors, though, are really flexible, and yeah, they're really good for morphing, but this is not the only use case that we have. And like this animation, for instance, you remember it from the previous slide probably, but Nick Butcher, he's a DA for Google, and he made it in Android by using just the animated durables, vector durables. And it's path morphing, it's translation, and it's also alpha animation, because the dots appear and disappear from left and right. So the pin jumps while the dots are moving, they are fading in, they are fading out, and this is not even the complex example probably that we can have with the vector, the animated vector durables. So they are very flexible. You can set the paths, you can set different colors, you can set gradients, you can set whatever you want. As long as it's an SVG or an icon, then you can do whatever the hell you want with it. So, physics-based animations. It's mostly to mimic real-time animations, and it's drawing influence from physics, and it creates motion that it's easy to understand. So for the user, it's just it's a motion that we are already used to that, and we're expecting it to happen, at least in real world. There are two physics-based animations that we can implement. The first one is the spring animation, which is this one, and the other one is the flink animation. Depending on the action, apparently you should choose the correct one, the appropriate one. The important bit to remember here is that on the physics-based animations, the motion has to be initialized by the user. So this is why you can only manipulate the physics-based animations from gesture listeners, because the motion has to come from the user. When you want to do the motion to follow the user gestures and velocity, this is where you use them. And also when you want to customize the recycler to flink animations. When not to use them, when your motion was not invoked by a user's action, and when in general, spring animations should be used with caution, because it can be very disruptive for your users. So finally, we have the constraint layout. And if we want to animate and especially translate multiple views, the motion layout, which is a subclass from the constraint layout, is the best and easiest way so far that I found. And for a motion layout to work, we need to specify a start scene and an end scene. There are two ways to implement that. So the first one is with having separate XML layouts for the files for starting and ending scenes. And here you can see that we set the constraints, everything as we would do normally, and we have all of the reviews here, and then we have the motion layout instead of the constraint layout. Has anyone here used the constraint layout? Oh, that's awesome. And the motion layout? You don't count. So the motion layout, when you have the starting and the ending screen, you just do whatever you would do for the constraint layout, and you start with how your screen should look when the user starts the action and when the user ends the action. So you have two separate XMLs. And the important thing to note here is that both XMLs should have the very same views. So this one, which is the end one, and if you can see here the difference, it's just the translation of the views. And if you don't want a view anymore and you want to get rid of it, you can either move it to the end of the, like outside of the view of the screen, and it's going to be translated to there, or you can just set the alpha and it's going to fade in or out. And after that, after we have the two constraint layouts that have the motion layout tag in there, then we just create the motion scene. And the motion scene file contains all the information needed to specify the animation. And this is the constraints sets that they are used, and transition, some keyframes that we're going to see later, touch handling, and more. So here we can see that for the constraint set end, we have our activity main end, and then we set the constraint set start to our activity main start, and of course the duration. And then we have the on swipe. This is how we are going to, like when we want the motion to happen. And of course we have the anchor ID over there. So which view should be the anchor for the motion. To connect the layout file on the motion scene, we just add the layout description tag over there, and it's as simple as that, and it works. So are you going to use it now? Any hands for they're going to at least give it a try? Okay.
Is it the physics motion?
Physics motion.
Yeah, if I wanted to touch the screen and manually go from like in the middle of the transition, or from the scene, starting scene, and then just slowly go into the other.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It does follow the motion of the user. So the second way to implement it, the motion layout, is the self-contained XML motion layout files. And this means that we only have one XML layout file and one motion scene again. But let's see. So this is our activity main. As you can see, there is not a start and end because, as we said, there is only going to be one. And as you can also see, even though it's from the constraint layout, we don't have any constraints there. So what we do is that instead we add them to the motion scene XML file. And we start by adding the transitions there, and you can see that I still have like the constraint set start, but instead of pointing it to my XML, I'm going to pointing it to an ID that is going to be my constraint set that I'm going to set later over there. And the same goes for the end. So let's see how our constraint set look like. So we have the ID of the views over there, and these are the same views that we have on the layout XML file. So for those views that I have of the layout file, I am just adding the constraints over here. And we also said that you can, boo. Okay, so now it works. So we also said that we can have keyframes, and in my opinion, the keyframes are probably the most powerful, or are probably going to be the most powerful tool for the motion layout. And keyframes allow you to specify the values for the attributes for in-between states. So when it's not at the start scene or at the end scene, then you can just specify for that time what value you want it to be. And so this is an example, and instead, like if we only have the motion scene and the motion layout without the keyframes, then it's just going to be a straight line from start to end. But if we do have the keyframes, then we're going to have that nice arc over there. So for now, there is not really a handy way to picture keyframes in our Android studios though. So it's a more of try and error. So you try and what looks good to your eye. I know it doesn't sound very well, but Google already announced the motion editor, and it's upcoming as everything. So hopefully when it's there, it's going to look something like that. And as you can see, you can just specify exactly the keyframes that you want, exactly the position in your layout, and exactly the key, the time values that you want it to be there. So as you can imagine, without the top image, the bottom becomes a bit hell. So when to use and not when to use. When to use, when you have complex layout animations. And this one was from the Android Dev Summit. This one, okay, was from the Android Dev Summit. And it shows really nicely like what you can achieve. And here you can see it with the paths enabled, if it loads, okay. So this is what you can achieve with the motion layout, and this and many more, of course. And here, when not to use. So self-contained motion scenes and keyframes are harder to implement because you don't have that visual thing that you can do it. That said, when the motion editor is going to be released, it's probably going to support only the self-contained motion scenes. So you can invest with trying out like having the two separate XMLs, but when the motion scene comes out, the motion editor comes out, then you might want to just implement the motion scene with just the constraint sets from the motion scene as well. And when not to use as well, when you have recycler view item animations, and just be prepared for what you're going to see. So everything works perfectly when you start, boo. So everything works perfectly when you start adding views, but when you remove them, it just jumps and it happens completely randomly. So yeah, this is when you add them and this is when you remove them. So bugs have been filed, but till it's fixed, you probably don't want to go that way. So rewinding what we've learned today, and I hope... So we have the basic view animations, when to use, never. We have the animator API, when to use, when you have multiple properties of views that you want to use, but they are really simple animations. Window content transitions, when you want to customize the enter, the exit, and the shared element transitions. And animated vector drawables, when you have SVG, when you have SVG images and icons. And as we said, they are very flexible, so you can do a lot of things with them. Thank you. Number 3 must be the lucky one. And then we have the physics-based animations, which is natural motion, interruptible, take care of that. Like you cannot interrupt the motion, and you can interrupt the motion when the user is still swiping or whatever. It's gesturing, and then we have the constraint layout and the motion layout when you want to have complex layout animations, and I guarantee that it's going to make your life much, much simpler when you have translations between multiple views. So, thank you. And we have about 10 minutes for questions. So please speak up.
On that slide that you were just showing, is there one of those that covers pretty much everything? Like if you were pretty proficient in the bottom one, perhaps you would never need to use the others. They all serve different purposes.
Yes, they all serve different purposes. So for the animator API, for instance, is when you want to rotate just one view, then it's just a simpler API that you can use. If you want to translate multiple views, then you might want to consider the motion layout. If you want to animate the motion between two screens, like two activities or a fragment an activity or whatever, then you want to use the window content transitions. So every one of them is for different purposes. The only one that it's not very clear is the basic view animations that you don't have to use. So yeah.